This week, we're going to look at Baudrillard. Now, there's a lot more to Jean Baudrillard than the concepts that we cover in A-level media studies. But to save us from a philosophy degree-level metaphysics course, we simplify some of his concepts so that we can use them for our own ends. Specifically, we focus on the post-structuralist, postmodern concepts of simulation and hyperreality. So, easiest way to cover these is to take a step back and then take a run up at it, and it should make a lot more sense.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
So if we jump back to semiotics, semiotics, as we all know, is concerned with the idea of that sign, signifier, and signified. But this structure really relies heavily on the overall agreement that there are specific, tangible, and fixed meanings to any of those things. And with that thought in mind, the surrealist painter Magritte created this masterpiece. So for those of you who don't speak French, this says, "This is not a pipe." So the idea here is the signified object is a pipe, a smoking pipe. But you're not looking at a smoking pipe. You are looking at a sign, not the signified. And the reason I show you this is because, in essence, post-structuralism argues that those signs and signifiers don't have fixed meanings. In fact, nothing does. Meaning only comes when signs work together. This is the reason why I'm always asking you to explain your deconstructions with the word context. Give me context. So to truly personify postmodernism, what we do now is we look at the way people begin to play with this image, and we get this, or this. It follows Baudrillard's ideas that in order to understand anything, humans relate the now topic or thing to another topic or thing. Essentially, all of discourse, discussion, is self-referential, or I suppose intertextual, if you like. Unfortunately, we're now heading full steam into that philosophy degree debate, so let's step back again and reframe this. In media studies, we're really approaching this whole debate from the concept of truth versus fiction, or real versus artificial. So, if we go back before the mass media, we had this world that was entirely based in reality. The people, the places, the things were from the real world and related to the real world. They represented the real world. But the idea is that now there is a disconnect. You know, the media captured, they distilled, and they heightened the real. It still reflected aspects of reality, but it was brighter, more colourful, more intense, more attractive, more interesting. Just more than simply reality. Then we begin to see aspects of that more being represented within other representations. They aren't just copies of reality, they're even more artificial. They're no longer even reflections of reality, they're just interpretations of it, someone's interpretation of reality. And what we get then is copies of copies of copies. You see, these copies, they've taken the place of the real. They are an imitation or a simulation, which Baudrillard calls simulacrum. Simulacrum is the singular, simulacra is the plural, more than one. Now, once we start to create artificial copies of everything through the mass media, and then our own experiences of those things are almost exclusively through those media, we end up in a situation where we begin to see a world that isn't based in the real at all, but it's a world built up of bricolage, of simulacra, a virtual reality, or as Baudrillard calls it, a hyper-reality. And that becomes very difficult to tell apart from the real world.
A whole virtual universe.
So when you think about the Maybelline That Boss Life, is the representation that we see in this advert real or hyper-real? So let's just completely ignore all the obvious representational choices of gender, sexuality and ethnicity that the producers have made in regards to Manny and Shayla. This product actually illustrates in a nutshell the issue that we might have with hyper-reality. when advertisers make adverts, they are tuned to appeal to your desires and your aspirations. And they need to be carefully constructed to help you visualize those desires and aspirations, to pull on those emotions to sell you the products. So they will show you the bright and the colourful. But there is not time in an advert to establish everything from the beginning. So what they do is they use shortcuts. When we were talking about Barthez, we mentioned referential codes. They give themselves context by referring to those imitations of reality that you've seen before. And we, the audience, we're very media savvy. We understand that, don't we?
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
We understand that no one travels with a suitcase full of mascara. This is, as the audience completely understands, a narrative device. They know that it is most likely that this hunk here isn't a real hotel porter. They are aware of the intertextual references to popular culture that we're seeing, like this one for Pulp Fiction, or an even more lost in time one, like the literally rolling in money from Danger Diabolique. The producers are making links for us that we're supposed to see the gold, and that equals wealth, and that equals luxury, and that equals happiness. And we get it. We're not naive. We're not stupid. And we will use other theorists to explore that and the heteronormative, the intertextuality, the subversion of conventions, even the language and the ideologies here. But the world where all of this takes place, that is at least the real world, right? You know, we're in New York. We recognise it. But is this a realistic representation of New York? Would you get a Manhattan corner penthouse hotel room if you went to New York? Is that reality? Or is the reality more likely to be this? And this is where Baudrillard comes in, because if meaning comes when signs work together, then the use of these shortcuts and stereotypes and unreal realities, when they become the norm, they also become reality. And our expectations of the world will no longer align with the actual real world. So Baudrillard argues then that when we live through the media, when we experience the media, we're essentially living in a simulation. So, thanks to the media, what we're doing is striving in our life to recreate in our own personal reality a world that doesn't exist anywhere except in the imagination of the people making the media. Now, Maybelline tries to look like reality, but there is very little reality in there at all. And we don't notice it because either we can't tell what's real anymore, or we prefer the simulation. You know, we want to live in the glossy, exciting, interesting Instagram simulation world. Is this the real Manny that we're seeing here, or is it a carefully constructed and polished simulation of what Manny wants you to think of when you think of him? He is, after all, a product. He's selling himself, the brand ambassador for Maybelline. These are really interesting ideas to apply when you're thinking about producers encoding their messages. They're really interesting to consider when you think about how audiences are making preferred or negotiated readings. And they're especially poignant when you start thinking about the role of media in the modern world. So what I'm hoping is that we don't have an exhaustive understanding of Baudrillard right now, but you've got a clear idea of what we're talking about when we cite Baudrillard, when we start talking about the concepts of simulations, simulacras, and hyperrealities.